Welcome once again to United Prison Ministry, changing lives on the inside. So happy that you have tuned in with us today, wherever you may be. It's been such a blessing and a pleasure to have our family to join us, because if it wasn't for you, we couldn't be here. And if it wasn't for you, we couldn't provide all this literature. Over 63 million pieces of literature we have given to prisoners in the last several years. Shirley, now, last week we had someone on the program, and they're back with us today. Can you tell us, give us a little background. Who was it, since you're from that same state?
Well, we had a justice on the Supreme Court of Mississippi, Justice James E. Graves, and at that time we asked him just sit here a while longer and let us do another recording for next week, because you've got so much that you need to share with the people out there. But Judge Graves is such a gracious individual. He said he'd stay. And I know that we're imposing on his time because I know that he has many, many responsibilities. And I have to respect a person who's been through the bottom of the ranks and come up, and to hear him in last week's program telling about the menial task of the jobs he had to work up to the position that he has on the Supreme Court of the state of Mississippi. He has to have a lot between the ears, and I think he does.
Because he earned every bit of it. That's what I like about it.
He earned it. It
Especially
wasn't
when he had
given
no
to him.
competition. And some of the stories, welcome once again, Justice Graves, welcome. And for our audience out there, you have a real treat with you today, so just stay right with us, because the judge is going to be sharing some more stories with us. And we're going to pick up, because I know our time is running out. You were telling us about the young man that met you in Walmart, didn't you?
That's correct.
I think it was Walmart. And what did he say to you? Pick up that story, and then we go into some more.
And what I shared is that young man is someone who I had sentenced to jail, and I had occasion. There were mornings where I would sentence some 20 to 25, sometimes 30 people to jail before noon, because they were coming in. You would enter a guilty plea, you review their constitutional rights. The average time may be 15 minutes, sometimes shorter than that, to just review the constitutional rights for entry of a guilty plea, and they'd be off having been sentenced. And so the burden of all of that was awesome. And there were days literally where it felt so burdensome just watching all those young men come through that I literally could not move. After I would adjourn court, and I almost was unable to get up, because it was just so overwhelming watching all those men go through the system in that way. But the thing that helps to make it rewarding are the young men like the one I was telling you about, who came up to me in Walmart, reminded me that I had sentenced him, but then told me that sentence saved his life, because it got him away from drugs, got him to turn his life around. And here he was wearing a jacket with the company logo, working a full-time job, was now married. He was in the store with his wife, and was also an ordained minister now.
Praise the Lord. And
so it's stories like that that are just so beautiful. And if we have the time, I'd like to share just one with you.
Well, go ahead on. Please, we have the time. We're going to take the time today.
I had a young lady, and this was early in my career as a trial judge, but there was a young lady who had given birth to a child. And what happened is that she was about 14 years old at the time she became pregnant. Went through all the months of pregnancy. Her mother never knew. Mother didn't know it. Her mother had suspected it, had some discussions with her, but never knew it. Mother comes home one day, and she's lying on the floor in the hallway, passed out. She's hemorrhaging. Mother rushes off to the hospital, and the doctors examine her, and they say, "Where is it?" And the mother says, "Where is what?" And the doctors say, "The baby. She's had a baby." And so they call the police. They go to the house, and they find in the trash can the child dead. And of course they arrest her, and she's charged with murder. And she stands before me, and this is maybe a year or so later. She's about 16 years old now. and she stands before me for sentencing. She has entered a plea of guilty to the crime of manslaughter. The state made no recommendation about a sentence, which is what we call an open plea. And so they leave it entirely to me as judge to determine the sentence without any recommendation from the state or the district attorney. And so we had taken the guilty plea on one day, and we set the sentencing off to another day for me to get a pre-sentence investigation report. And my practice at the time was I would take my pre-sentence investigation report, take my files home, and the night before my sentencing hearings, because I just didn't want the weight of these decisions on me any longer than I had to have it.
I know what you mean. Woo.
And so the night before my sentencing hearings, I would take my materials home, I would read, and try to prepare for sentencing, and then I knew I wanted to keep an open mind to see what I would hear the next day. And this one weighed the heaviest on me of all the ones that I had, because I said, Lord, here I have a teenager who probably was in denial the whole time about the situation she was in. She had actually gone to band practice the day she had the child. She went to band practice that day, who was in denial the whole time about it. And I could see no real benefit in sending her to jail, but at the same time, you don't want to send the message that it's okay to have a baby and just get rid of it. And so I'm struggling with this, and I'm praying about it, and I got up the next morning and I said, Lord, I don't know what I'm going to do with this child. And I got into the shower, which psychologically, if you got to go to work, is the last safe place between you and all that work that waits for you. And if you're expecting a rough day, you stay in the shower till the hot water runs out. So I stayed in the shower that morning until the hot water began to run out, and all of a sudden, it just came to me. And I jumped out of the shower, grabbed my robe. I was still dripping wet, and I started scribbling notes on a pad in my bedroom. My wife said, what are you doing? I said, I know what I'm going to do. I said, the Lord just told me what
Praise
I'm going to do.
Lord.
And I'm still dripping wet, and there's water spots on the paper because I'm writing out my ideas. Now, I still have the sentencing hearing coming up. So we go into the sentencing hearing. All of the things that I suspected were going on psychologically in the family and the household were confirmed. They called a psychiatrist to testify. The woman who was raising her wasn't her mother, but her sister was a sister of her mother. Her mother had actually been taken off to an asylum and institutionalized. And the doctor confirmed that she was in denial about the pregnancy, didn't tell the mother. The caretaker, who, as it turns out, was her aunt, didn't tell her. And so all of the things really that the Lord had revealed to me were just confirmed in court that day. And so she stood before me, and of course I have to give some sentence, and I got the DA on one side saying, you can't just let this go, and then I got the family on the other side sitting there looking at me saying, please don't send my baby to jail. And ultimately what I did is I gave her a sentence, suspended all of it, put her on probation.
Praise the Lord.
Told her, I gave her a curfew, I think until she was 21. I said she's going to get with a boy, she's going to do it before 9 o'clock at night. And so I gave her a curfew, I think, until she was 21, ordered her to finish school. She had actually missed a year of school just from going to therapy because of all the trauma of having a child and what happened to it and all of that. And then the other persuading factor for me is that there was no clinical evidence that the child was ever alive subsequent to the birth. And so I had that fact, that there was no actual evidence that she did anything to it.
She could have been born dead.
Could have been born dead. And so I had all of those factors working, but I fashioned that sentence and gave her probation. And several months later, it was the Monday or Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and I come in and there is a letter. And I open it up and I began reading, and she said, the letter says, hello, Judge Graves. And she said, this is, and she gave me her name, and she said, you sentenced me several months ago. She said, it's Thanksgiving Day. And she said, I was just sitting here thinking of all the things that the Lord has given me to be thankful for.
Oh, my.
And she went on to say in the letter, she said, and I thank God that there was a judge like you who was sitting on the bench, who understood my situation and understood my circumstances and knew when to be merciful and when to show some leniency. And she promised me in that letter that she would finish high school and that she would go on to college and that she wanted to become a dentist. And the last report I got from a mother who was raising her is that she was in college and was doing well.
Isn't that
But
something?
that letter,
Yeah.
and I am reluctant to cry, but that letter brought me really, really close.
Oh, my.
But it's those few times when you know you've been able to really make a difference in somebody's life that makes all the times that you just have to sentence somebody. It makes it all worthwhile, and it restores your faith in the fact that human beings can change and that God can work to change people and affect lives and influence people.
Human beings do change, and that's what we're all about, is changing lives on the inside.
And you know, that's what keeps me going. I mean, people say for the last 20-something years, why are you doing that? Because I see lives change. And you know one thing? Maybe they ought to call you Solomon Graves, because that was wise. That
was a wise decision.
Wise. But the Lord spoke to him, though. You know,
I know.
when you're in touch with the Lord, you don't make bad decisions.
Well,
and that's
God's
why the
good.
Lord put him there, you know, for such a time as this. But I want our people out there to see the wonderful book that we've been talking about for the last few weeks, Bible Questions Answers. This is now being made available not only to those who are incarcerated, but for those who are in the community who want to share some good information. And like Shirley said before, this is not a denominational book. This is put together by Protestants, Catholics, and everybody else. Encyclopedias, information in here, 14 beautiful Bible studies, Your Honor, and I want you to have some of these so you can give to your friends. So at the present time that they can show this on the screen so that our people at home can see this now.
Questions. People in here, they're filled with questions. Serious questions.
How can God love a criminal?
Tough questions.
How can God reach me in prison?
Important questions.
Who will take care of my children?
But they're not the only ones asking questions. People out here, they're asking questions too. Just as serious.
What happens when I die?
Just as tough.
How can God forgive me?
Just as important.
Is there really a hell?
Now, you can give them all the answers. Real answers. Simple answers. Powerful answers. Bible answers. With UPMI's new Bible Questions Answered, call 1-888-876-4123 to get your copies of Bible Questions Answered. People everywhere are asking tough questions. Now you can hand them an answer. Call now. The questions are tough. The answers are simple.
You know, it was wonderful, Judge Gray, for you to say those things that you said, but I know you've had some experiences that have touched your heart, but now I hear about judges being threatened. Have you ever been threatened?
That's an interesting question, and I think most people would probably think that the threats would come from the number of criminal defendants, from one of those criminal defendants maybe that I had sentenced. But the fact of the matter is, people seem to get a lot more upset about matters having to do with money. And so the few times that I've had threatening phone calls, they've been about cases that had to do with money. One was an automobile accident case where somebody thought they should have won, and they were upset about that. But I have not had any threats in the context of criminal cases now. And part of that maybe is in the courtroom, my contact where I'm taking guilty pleas is really, like I said, in taking a guilty plea, it's about 15 minutes. And it is not my practice to, I don't give lectures, I don't presume that I'm going to be able to say something in 1 or 2 minutes that's going to change somebody's life. Now, obviously, the guy I told you about at Walmart said that what I said to him kind of straightened him up and that kind of thing. But the giving of lectures, I don't presume that I'm going to know enough about a person to be able to discern what their needs are, what they need to hear. Now, there are times when I'm sitting there and the Lord just, it's like the Lord is saying, ask him this, ask him that. And I'll ask this question or that question, and it will be just the right question to be asked to get to what I need. But one of the reasons for it probably is, and that's because the publisher of the black newspaper, they told me that there was a guy who had been through the system several times, but he said the guy remarked, when I said been through the system, he'd been a criminal defender, but he said the guy remarked to him that Judge Graves was the most respectful to him of any courtroom that he'd ever been in. But even with inmates, I refer to them, I say yes, sir, and no, sir, to them when they ask me questions.
That's important.
And I call them Mr., and I mean, I give them titles, and number one, it's just the way I was raised, and number two, just because a person has committed a crime or been convicted of a crime doesn't mean they're no longer a human being, doesn't mean they're no longer entitled to be respected.
Amen.
And that's how I've always treated inmates. However minimal the contact is that I have with them, I still treat them like they're a person, and I treat them with respect.
You know, you brought up something that I want to talk about just for a minute, Shirley. We are involved with a prison in California, Maranatha Prison, which someday I hope you go out there. It's a friend of mine who's a Christian individual. He's a businessman. And through our conversation, have traveled around the world together in other parts of the world, he said, why don't we be able to do this like we do in the communist country, to demand that they read religious material? So Shirley at that time was a warden over here at Tutwiler in the state of Alabama, and along with another one, said you can't do that. But what you can do, if you own your own prison, you can give them a choice. So he opened up this prison called Maranatha in California. And we give them a choice. The first thing he demanded of his officers, that they called every inmate Mr. And let me tell you something.
Respect.
Did it make it respect? And that was a big tone outside of the diet. Now I'm saying that because
Be sure the judge gets a copy of the tape in which we have the testimonies of these individuals who tell just how important it is to be called Mr.
It's a respect.
And so let me tell you what is happening. One of your colleagues over here that's in Brent, Alabama now, that's the warden there.
Cheryl Price.
That's right. She just contacted us about a month ago. She says, look, in fact, it was a month ago. She says, I got 1,896 guys. She said, but I got a dorm that's the worst. And I want you to come twice a week to work with them. And the first thing I told them when I went over there, I didn't even ask her though, I went by Walmart again and got some little name things here. And so when I got there, I wrote their name down and I said, now what's your name? And they said, James Graves. I said, no, you're no longer James, you are Mr. Graves, you know, like that.
That's right.
And I put that on there and I said, from now on in this class, you're a Mr. And automatically I said, they said, well, why? I said, okay, suppose I told you James was coming in the door. They said, I wouldn't probably look up. So I said, Mr. Graves is coming. They said, well, we'll look up. I said, just the name makes a difference. And it's very important that we recognize it. And I'm so happy that you're doing that in the state of, where you're from.
I've always done it in the
because,
always.
And I wish it'd be contagious to other people, because even these officers in prison call them by all kinds of names, and all that stuff. And that's the way they try to act. You know good, they say, well, I'm going to live up to what you're telling me. But if you call him Mr. And share something else, I just want to, as I'm thinking about you, and I know you're probably well sought after to speak all over the country, so you're not looking for no more speaking engagement. But I will say this, though, that people need to hear your story. And maybe, like you said, maybe our program or other programs, they will pick this up. And, and I think you're doing a worthwhile service, not only to the state of Mississippi, but to America.
Thank you very much.
For where you come from and where you are. And the record speaks for itself. I like what you're doing. You're giving God the glory. Because he did it. Like you say, he's speaking through you, you're praying through you, and I met your lovely wife, and I know she's a praying woman, praying lady, you see how I should say this. And also she has a beautiful singing voice, and I wish she would come on the program with us sometime too.
Well, I'm sure she will.
Because she's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful music. Well, you heard her too.
Yes,
though,
I have. She's beautiful. I said, when they walk into a room, there's just this feeling, an aura about them both. You can feel the love of God between the two of these individuals. They have a presence about them.
And I had the privilege the other night to talk to your son. I called him, he told me you were out of town, and I talked to him. I said, oh, you're the one that keeps him up to take him out for dinner later night. He said, I guess I am the one.
He's the one.
But, Your Honor, Sheriff, as you look at with the situation, period, what's the answer to crime as you see it?
Well, I am really glad you asked that question. And I tell people all the time, I sentenced so many people to prison over the years, hundreds, thousands actually, but the one thing that was most common as among all the people that I sent to prison is that they dropped out of school. Now, you can talk about broken homes, absence of fathers in the home, and all of that stuff, but the one factor that was the most common is that they dropped out of school. And so the most important thing that we can do for our children is to keep them in school. Now, what I tell people is, once I have them in school, I want them to have a meaningful, substantive educational experience while they're in the school, but they just need to be in school. I sentenced very, very few college graduates to prison. And typically when I did, it was some drug-related offense because they had developed some dependency on drugs. But it is so serious, this problem of our kids dropping out of school, that I tell kids now, I say, the day you drop out of school, you ought to pick up the phone and call the prison nearest to you and ask them to save a space for you because you just dropped out of school. And so you have increased exponentially the likelihood that you will be needing a space at that facility. And so the most important thing I think we can do to try to stem the crime rate is to keep kids in school. One of the newspaper reporters called me and they asked me about the truth in sentencing bill, and they wanted increased sentencing. So if you give somebody 10 years, it means 10 years, and they serve 10 years and all of that stuff. And I said a couple of things. I said, one, do you think there's some guy trying to decide whether or not he's going to carjack somebody at 10 o'clock at night? He's sitting there figuring out whether or not he's going to have to do 85% of the time or 75% of the time.
That's right. Yeah.
I said, I really don't think he is. I said, but the most important piece of anti-crime legislation is the teacher pay raise bill.
No,
and they said, explain that to me.
That's right.
And I explained the importance of education and the importance of having good teachers and funding education. And I don't think there is anything more important that we can do to try to stem the growth of crime and to try to stem that tide than to keep kids in school. And then they need to have a meaningful educational experience while they're there. That's how I think we fix it.
Isn't that something?
And we like to tie that in with the knowledge of Christ in their life. When we're educating, to me, that was a part of my basic primary education is from my grandmother. And I'm sure you did too, like you said, from a poor family in Mississippi.
Absolutely.
Well, we were poor in Mississippi also. But my grandmother instilled in me the fact that I was somebody and God loved me. And I needed to know that. And if she had not taught me about God's love and how I needed to follow God's direction, then I wouldn't be who I think I am today, and I like me today.
Since I got you on here and you can't move, let me ask you this question. The Bible, prayer, is not allowed in your schools, in the public schools, right?
That's correct.
Why is it allowed in prison? No, wait, first, who owns the public schools?
Well, the public schools are actually owned by the government, which is the public, which is the people.
Okay. Who owns the prison?
Except in those places where prisons are privatized, and those are
Who owns the
increasing.
prisoner? Yeah.
But the prisons are typically owned by the government, and that is the people. And
The same people that own the schools
That's
own the
correct.
prison.
That's
But
correct.
you
Okay.
can't pray in school.
No, I don't understand that.
But we're going to say it's okay to pray in prison after the fact.
I mean,
Cart before the horse.
what's the legal reading on that? I don't understand that.
Well, the legal reasoning has to do with the constitutional provision for the separation of church and state,
Okay.
and how the Constitution is construed leads to the conclusion that prayer should not be allowed in schools. But for me, I think we first have to recognize that there were three important institutions in our society.
That's right.
Churches, schools, and families.
That's correct.
And those are, in my opinion, the three most important institutions. Now, you can talk about government as an institution, and it has its place. But the three most important institutions are churches, schools, and families. And unfortunately, all three of them are busy blaming the other two
That's right. You're
for
right.
society's problems. And so families want schools to fix everything. And churches want the families to do better, and they want whatever schools there are to do better. And so they're sitting in church saying, Lord, if we just get the sinners in here with the saints, we'd be all right. each one of those institutions, number one, has to function the way it is supposed to. But neither of those institutions has the luxury of waiting for the other one to do what it's supposed to do.
Amen. You know,
And
it starts
so-
with that family.
Exactly. It starts with the family, but if the family's not functioning the way it's supposed to, then the school ought to be taking up the
Right.
slack, or the church ought to be taking up the slack.
Amen.
Right.
Now, one of the interesting things that my son said to me when they were having some big debate about prayer in schools several years ago, when my son, the one that you mentioned earlier, was in middle school. He was about 6th grade, and he came home and he said, "Dad, you know, there's all this talk about praying in schools, and they say that we can't pray in schools." And I said to him, I said, "Well, how do you feel about that?" And he's about 10 or 11. He said, "Well, I can pray to God anytime I want to." He said, "I thought I could pray anytime," and I said, "You can." And so the recognition is that if you really want to pray,
Yeah.
they don't have to set aside any time for it. They don't have to make time for it. They don't have to say it's legal to do it. If you really want to do it, then you do it. And so for those kids who are in schools and public schools where prayer isn't allowed, if the church is training them up the way they're supposed to be trained up, they know that they can pray
They
whenever
know
they want
that
to
they
pray.
can meditate, they can pray at any time, at any place. You're right on target, Judge.
But what I want you to do, though, is look in that camera over there to my right, and I want you to talk to the families, talk to prisoners, because they're going to be looking at this tape. What do they need to do to stay out of your system? To put you out of a job?
For the kids, if you want to stay out of the criminal justice system, the most important thing that a child can do is stay in school and get an education. Do not be deterred from that. Do not be distracted from that. You need to stay in school and get an education, because if you've been listening to the program, you've heard me say that more often than not, the people I send to prison are people who dropped out of school. To parents, I just say, and it was such an honor for me, and of all the awards I've received over the years, receiving Parent of the Year for Jackson Public School System, to me, is the most important award that I have ever received. But to parents, I'd say, I never said there's any such thing as quality time. To me, it's just time. My father spent time with me because he was there and he was being my father. And we didn't call it quality time. Sometimes we just sat around and ate milk and bread, and he'd tell me stories about the 9 months that he spent 20, 30 years telling me about the 9 months that he was in the Army. But the time I spent with him, in retrospect, is time that I spent learning life's lessons. And so to parents, I just say, take the time, make time, spend time with your children. Don't worry about quality time. Just spend the time.
Okay, Justice Grave, once again, our time is running out, and you got to come back with us sometime in the future. May God bless you. And for those, look at this program and contact United Prison Ministry. Check us out on the webpage. We're going to have your story up there. May God bless you. Till we see you again next week.